Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Avital, and I'll tell you about a project called Reorganization in Cerebral and Cerebellar Cortices is not restricted by Somatotopy. If this works, that is. Am I doing something wrong here? Oh.
Okay.
Is this going to work now?
Okay.
Are we sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So we all know that the sensory motor system has a somatotopic organization, and this basically means that information from different body parts are processed in different areas across the sensory motor cortex. We can also visualize this organization as a homunculus. But what happens to this organization or homunculus if inputs, oh, this wasn't supposed to happen because this is the wrong. Okay, if inputs from one hand are missing. Now, under such circumstances, it is believed that the deprived hand region undergoes reorganization. And this means the flexible reallocation of resources due to deprivation. And for example, in people born without one hand, whom I'll refer to as one-handers, so they're not amputees, they were born without one hand, we've previously shown that the representation of the residual arm actually invades into the deprived hand region. And this is a form of reorganization. So what drives this sensory motor reorganization? Well, it may come as no surprise that the representation of the arm invades into the hand because these are neighboring areas. And it's basically textbook knowledge that areas that are close together, that are neighboring, can undergo reorganization. So it seems that what drives sensory motor reorganization is just somatotopy. But there's another option. Because these individuals that don't have a hand still have to cope with an environment that requires bimanual coordination. I mean, think about the different tasks, daily tasks that you do that require both hands. How would you open a water bottle if you only have one hand? So in a series of papers, we've actually shown that these individuals born without one hand rely on their residual arm to carry out these tasks. So it could be that the arm that is now used instead of a hand needs more cortical resources. And therefore, this reorganization is not the mere product of somatotopy, but it could also be driven by compensatory behavior. Now, we can't differentiate between these two options for the residual arm, but we can look at other parts of the body, because if we show that these one-handers not only rely on the residual arm, but also on other body parts, such as the intact hand, the legs, or the lips, then we can look at their brains and ask whether we see reorganization of these body part representations into the hand area. Now, the representation of the intact hand is on the other hemisphere. The representation of the legs and the lips are very far away from the hand representation. So if we do find this reorganization of these body parts into the hand region, this is less likely to be driven by somatotopy and more likely to be driven by compensatory behavior. So we first wanted to characterize the compensatory behaviors of one-handers. We designed ecological tasks, that is, tasks we all do in our daily lives, like opening a water bottle, and we measured the level to which these one-handers rely on different body parts to carry out these tasks. And as you can see here, one-handers in white, compared to controls in gray, overly use their feet and their lips when carrying out these tasks. They do heavily use their intact hand, but they don't overuse it. They don't use it any differently than the way two-handed people use their intact hand. So it seems that we have a complex repertoire of compensatory behavior. We have the residual arm, which we've shown before to be used for compensation, and the lips and the feet. So does this repertoire of compensatory behavior drive reorganization? For this reason, we put them in a scanner, and we asked them to move different body parts. We recruited 17 one-handers and 24 two-handed controls. And what you're going to see here is the hemisphere that is contralateral to the missing hand in one-handers and contralateral to the non-dominant hand of two-handed controls. You can also see a visualization of the homunculus. You can see here in green the hand region, and you can see below it in blue the lip region. So when one-handers move the residual arm in this whole brain analysis, compared to two-handed controls, they actually overactivate this cluster that you see in warm colors. And this cluster falls right within the deprived hand region, the ROI I showed you before. So it seems that there is this reorganization of the residual arm representation into the hand representation as we previously reported. Now we can see the same effect using an ROI analysis. And here you can see that one-handers in white compared to two-handed controls in gray overly activate the deprived hand region. But this effect is specific to the deprived hand region because we don't see the same effect for the intact hand region, which you see here. And this is reflected in a significant interaction. So this is for the residual arm. What happens for other body parts? Well, when one-handers move their lips and their feet, we see a very similar effect. We see this activation of the deprived hand region, which is also reflected in ROI analysis and significant interactions. So it seems that all body parts used for compensation, the residual arm, the lips, and feet, undergo reorganization into the hand region. Interestingly, the intact hand, which is not used for compensation, as I showed you before, does not reorganize into the deprived hand region because we don't see any group differences when one-handers move their intact hand. So can compensatory behavior drive reorganization? Possibly. Notice there is no causal evidence that I'm presenting here now. But what we can say for sure is that in the cerebral cortex, somatotopy does not restrict reorganization, because even those body part representations that are far away from the hand region can nevertheless reorganize into the hand region. And these are the same maps as I showed you before for the residual arm, lips, feet, and intact hand. And this is a very robust effect. It is so robust we can actually replicate it across 2 additional independent data sets of participants. And in all these data sets, and in these 2, you can see the hand area in yellow, we see the exact same effects. Body parts used for compensation undergo reorganization into the hand area. The intact hand, which is not used for compensation, does not undergo this reorganization. So it seems that somatotopy does not restrict reorganization. Now, how can we further verify this interpretation of our findings? Well, so far I've described the cerebral cortex. I showed you the hand area, which you see here in red, which is quite far away from both the lip representation in blue and the feet representation in green. But we can look at areas, other sensory motor terminals that have a different spatial layout of representations, a different somatotopy. For example, the cerebellum. And in the cerebellum, the hand region in red is the immediate neighbor of the lip representation, but it's more far away from the feet representation. So if somatotopy drives reorganization, we would expect to find different patterns of reorganization between the cerebral cortex and the cerebellum because they have a different spatial layout of representations. But this is actually not the case. So what you see here is a flat map of the cerebellum. You can see the homunculus, and specifically you can see the hand area in yellow. And you can see that for movements of the lips and the feet, one-handers overly activate the deprived hand region. We don't see this in a whole brain analysis for the residual arm, but this may be just because the representation in the cerebellum of the residual arm really overlaps with the representation of the hand. So a more sensitive ROI analysis does show us this effect. So you can see that in all ROI analysis, one-handers overly activate the deprived hand region of the cerebellum compared to controls, and this is specific to the deprived hand region rather than to the intact hand region. Again, this is a very robust effect that can be replicated across another independent data set of participants. So we can study another sensory motor terminal that has yet another somatotopic arrangement, and that is the putamen of the basal ganglia. And here, the hand region, in red, is the immediate neighbor of both the lip and foot representations. And again, although there is a different spatial layout of representations, we can see the exact same pattern of reorganization. So one-handers in white overly activate the deprived putamen compared to controls in movements of the residual arm, lips, and feet, all used for compensation, but not for movements of the intact hand, which is not used for compensation. So we have 3 different sensory motor terminals with different layouts, of different somatotopic layouts, and nevertheless, we see the exact same pattern of reorganization. Does this mean that somatotopy does not restrict reorganization? Well, not necessarily. We can perhaps hypothesize, and this is merely a speculation that I'm going to describe here, we could think that perhaps neighboring body part representations can only remap, only those that are really neighboring the hand area can remap into the hand area. Now, we know that the lip and feet representations remap into the hand area, and this would only be possible in the putamen if we believe that indeed only neighboring body part representations can reorganize. So it could be that in the putamen, the lip and feet representations could reorganize into the hand area. So we have inputs from the lip and feet in the hand area. And now this sensory motor terminal, the putamen, projects to the hand areas, the deprived hand areas of the cerebral cortex and cerebellum. So if we only look at the cerebral cortex and cerebellum when we see inputs from the lips and feet, we could assume that we see reorganization at the level of the cerebral cortex and cerebellum. But in fact, what we could be looking at is just a reflection of reorganization going on elsewhere, possibly in the putamen. So let's summarize. Here we propose that somatotopy in the cerebral and cerebellar cortices does not restrict reorganization. This is because also body part representations that are far away from the hand can reorganize into the hand region. If not somatotopy, it could be that reorganization may be related to compensatory daily behavior, and this is for now only a working hypothesis because we haven't replicated it and we don't have causal evidence for this. However, there is another option, and that is that reorganization may depend on somatotopy in upstream brain regions, such as the basal ganglia or the putamen. I want to thank Tamar Makin for collaborating with me on this work and her group. I want to thank the various funding agencies to support my work. Thank you for listening, and do visit my poster today.